When a professor tried to humiliate a student, she had no idea who she was dealing with at one of the most prestigious universities in America. Dr. Linda Markham's advanced calculus class was known for two things: her sharp mathematical mind and her not-so-subtle political agenda. That morning, as students entered the lecture hall, something felt different. Instead of complex equations on the whiteboard, there was a simple message: today's topic, redefining academic priorities. In the back of the room sat a tall, quiet young man dressed in a sharp black suit. He rarely spoke, kept to himself, and few students knew him personally. But everyone knew who he was: Barron Trump. What they didn't know was that beneath his reserved demeanor was a mind that would soon leave the entire room speechless. A lesson in privilege. Dr. Markham began her lecture with an unusual tone, pacing more aggressively than usual. Mathematics, she declared, while important, must make room for discussions about real-world issues. Some students shifted uncomfortably. They had signed up for an advanced math class, not a social justice seminar. Then her lesson took a sharper turn. She pulled up a PowerPoint slide. Instead of calculus, it showed statistics about gender representation in STEM fields. Some of you, she said, scanning the room before letting her gaze settle meaningfully in Barron's direction, need to accept that your privileged position in this class isn't necessarily a reflection of merit. A few students turned to see Barron's reaction, but he remained completely composed, his hand raised. Patient, steady. Dr. Markham ignored him and continued. For example, she said, clicking to the next slide, family connections and wealth can create artificial advantages in education. It wasn't subtle. The implication was clear. Still, Barron's hand remained raised. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she sighed and acknowledged him. Yes, Mr. Trump, she asked, her voice laced with condescension. Do you have something to add to our discussion about privilege in education? The room fell silent. The genius speaks Barron lowered his hand and responded, his voice calm and respectful. Professor, I believe calculus is fundamental to both theoretical and applied sciences. Many of us chose this class to deepen our mathematical understanding. Wouldn't reducing the core curriculum disadvantage all students, regardless of their background? Several heads nodded in agreement. Dr. Markham's expression hardened. Mr. Trump, she said, emphasizing his last name, perhaps you, of all people, should understand how privilege shapes education. Not everyone has private tutors and elite prep schools. Instead of getting defensive, Barron simply smiled. You're right about one thing, he replied. I have been fortunate in my education. That's precisely why I believe we should maintain high academic standards, so that everyone has the opportunity to reach their full potential. The professor's face flushed. This wasn't going as she had planned. And you think you know better than your professor about academic standards? She scoffed. Tell me, what makes you such an expert on mathematics? Barron remained unfazed. I'm not claiming to be an expert, he said. I'm just a student who loves math, and I believe its power lies in its objectivity, not in politics. He gestured toward the equation-free whiteboard. Instead of debating privilege, couldn't we spend this time exploring the beautiful complexities of calculus? The tension in the room was thick. The challenged Dr. Markham's lips curled into a smirk. Very well, Mr. Trump, she said, turning to the whiteboard. Since you're so passionate about mathematics, let's put that passion to the test. She picked up a marker and began writing. Fast. Gasps rippled through the class. What she had written wasn't just a difficult problem. It was graduate-level calculus, requiring advanced integration techniques they hadn't even covered yet. She stepped back, crossing her arms. Since you're so concerned about academic rigor, why don't you solve this? Unless, of course, you'd rather discuss your privileged background instead. A student whispered, That's not fair. That's way beyond our level. But Barron wasn't intimidated. Of course, he said simply, standing up. Dr. Markham's smirk widened. She had designed this problem to be nearly impossible at their level. What she didn't realize was she had just made a critical mistake. The solution? No one expected Barron took the marker and examined the equation. Before I begin, he said, I noticed that this problem has multiple possible approaches. Would you prefer the standard method, or would you like to see a more elegant solution I found while studying Leibniz's original papers? Silence. Dr. Markham's confidence faltered. "You've read Leibniz's original papers?" she asked. "Yes," Barron replied. "In German. The translations lose some of the elegance." And with that, he turned to the board and began writing. Students leaned forward, phones recording. Step by step, Barron deconstructed the equation with an effortless precision that left the class stunned. "This first step," he explained, "uses a technique Euler developed in 1755. It simplifies what appears complex into something more intuitive." Even the weaker students could follow his logic. He wasn't just solving the problem, he was teaching it. Dr. Markham's confident expression collapsed as she watched. Then Barron paused. "We have two paths forward," he said. "The standard method will take another full board. But there's a more elegant approach using Leibniz's insights. Which would you prefer?" A quiet voice spoke up. "Could we see both?" asked Sarah, one of the quieter students. Barron smiled and turned to Dr. Markham. Her face was pale. She had just been outclassed in front of her entire class. Before she could respond, the classroom door burst open. The final lesson. Dean Richardson, a known ally of Dr. Markham's, stormed in. "Linda, we need you for an emergency faculty meeting." The timing couldn't have been better. For her. "We'll have to continue this another time," she said quickly, trying to escape. But Barron wasn't done. "Professor," he said, his voice carrying quiet authority, "you challenged me publicly. Walking away now would teach an unfortunate lesson about academic integrity." The class murmured in agreement. The dean frowned. Dr. Markham's hand tightened around the marker. Then after a long pause, she sighed. "I've made a mistake," she admitted. "I was so focused on proving a point that I forgot what truly matters. Merit. And Mr. Trump, you've just reminded me why I became a teacher in the first place." A slow applause started from the back of the room. It grew louder until the entire class was on its feet. As Barron sat back down, a student turned to him and whispered, "Dude, are you even real?" He just smiled.